It's weighing in, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another week of the Weighing In podcast on NJ.com. Wednesday, January 28th, 2026. We're getting close to the postseason. A lot of action this past week around New Jersey. County and conference tournaments galore up and down the state. We had some huge dual matches to go over, a lot of changes in our individual rankings, some wrestlers dropping weight, some wrestlers actually going up a weight. So as always, a lot to talk about as we bring everybody in. I'm your host, Bob Batters, joined as always with our fellow NJ.com wrestling writers, Joe Zedalis, Bill Evans, Ryan Patti, and Jake Aferiat, as we still are trying to dig out from this snow up and down New Jersey. And we've got guys all the way in North Jersey. Joe and I are over the shore, Bill down south, and it's snow and ice everywhere. So looks like most of the schedule was wiped out Monday and then again Tuesday. Looking like we're going to be pretty much back to normal for Wednesday with some big matches on the slate. We'll get to that later. Of course, we're going to recap all the big action from last week, led by several county and conference tournaments. Talk about some wrestlers that surprised us within those tournaments. I'll touch on some of the weight classes that are intriguing us. We were able to talk to Howell standout junior Tanner Hodgins for an interview. So we'll hear from Tanner a little bit later on, and then we'll, as always, look ahead to some of the big duels coming up this week. So, guys, again, every week there's been substantial action and a lot to talk about, and this past week was no different with a bunch going on. We'll start with the number one team in the land, and that's Delbarton and the Green Wave. Had a huge home duel against Faith Christian Academy. Delbarton came in ranked, I believe, number 5 in the country. Faith Christian, number 2. Ryan was there in the house, an electric atmosphere, Ryan, and a match that did not disappoint.
Yeah, I mean, what a match, guys. This might have actually topped the Blair match from last year. And, I'm not sure it's going to top the euphoria of beating a Blair, proving you're the number one team in the state. But, it's a match that was absolutely incredible. I mean, the place was jumping from 106 to 285. And I think this played about as well as it could have and you see the intro right there. I mean, the place was going ballistic. It played out about as well as it could have for Coach Stoll and company. I mean, you had Gabe Logan get caught at 175. Granted, it was against Nick Singer. But the kids stayed off their back when they had to. And, they won the toss-ups that could have flipped the match the other way. 106 being one of them. Finn Anderson, over Crandall for the second time this year. He beat him earlier in the year. I believe it was at Ironman. And this was another all-time moment for Delbarton wrestling. And they could still dream about, being the number one team in the country. And where else would you rather be? And, we'll see where they end up later in the week when the national rankings get updated, on Flow Wrestling and Mat Scouts. But, I mean, what a night for Delbarton wrestling once again. They do it once again. And we'll talk about that Blair match coming up on Thursday later in the episode. But also, you had St. Joe's. They beat Paramus Catholic on Wednesday, and then they beat Bergen Catholic on Saturday. 41-31 against PC, 34-32 against BC. And I just want to quickly highlight 2 wrestlers here. You had Ryan Mitchell, the 157-pound junior. He was kind of the hero in both matches. He pinned Harry Asatrian to beat Paramus Catholic. And then he beat Joey Canova. He spoiled the Princeton Commits season debut, beat him 7-1. And he came up clutch both times. And he's kind of looking like a kid who can go from a state blood rounder to a state medalist. And then Mikey Bautista, who might be wrestling better than anyone right now. He teched Joey Polici on Wednesday, a Beast of the East medalist. And then he teched Matt Mulligan, who was 8th last year at 106. So, Mikey Bautista, just out of nowhere, he got majored 3 weeks ago by Sal Barametti, 12-0. And Sal Barametti's no slouch. He's a 2-time state medalist, but I don't believe the margin is that big. And I think we're seeing that now. 3 weeks later, Mikey Bautista looking like one of the best wrestlers in the state at 126, maybe second best to Paul Kenny. I think he's right up there with Tommy Marchetti, but there's a lot of other guys at that weight class. Really just 2 great weeks from Delbarton and St. Joe's.
And Ryan, I want to go back to the Delby match real quick because, it was an epic duel, 31-29, the win for the Green Wave. The team split about 7-7. And certainly the wins and the bonus points were big for Delbarton where it could get them. But I look at that box score, and the saving of bonus points really stood out to me, from, a handful of guys, Nikki Schwartz holding Joe Bachman, one of the best pound-for-pound wrestlers in the country, to a decision, losing 4-3. You had Carl Betts doing the same thing against Adam Waters, 2-1. And then coming down to the end, Augie Moser, against, one of the best heavyweights in the country, and just saving bonus points to clinch them to win. And those are the kind of things you need in dual meets. You want to win big, but sometimes you need guys to just limit the bonus points. And, those were three obviously crucial weight classes for Delbarton to limit the damage.
Yeah, I think if Schwartz had another, if wrestling was 4 periods, I think Schwartz was very much in that match. I mean, he made it real close there in that third period, just didn't have enough time, obviously, to complete the comeback. He was really, really, just fighting in that third period. And then, Coach Stoll, they had the criteria. Faith Christian forfeited 126, but, Coach Stoll was sweating there, 75, 90, 215, and 285. And, the kids just stayed off their back. CJ Betts, I'm sure he would have liked to have beaten Adam Waters. He beat him earlier in the year, but he holds him to a decision. That was a very close decision. And then 215 and 285, Brody Ismail did a really good job against Weidemoyer. And then you had at 285, Augie Moser. Again, Augie Moser's jumping into the crowd to end the match, celebrating with his, his classmates. So, they did their job. They stayed off their back.
Joe and I were at Lakewood High School on Friday and Saturday for the Shore Conference tournament. Joe wrote about this, after Friday's session that, the tournament really, it could be an A+. I think right now it's right in the B territory just because you don't have Southern there. Christian Brothers didn't have its full complement of wrestlers there. So you didn't have, all the top talent in the Shore, but still a very good tournament with a lot of, top wrestlers around the state. Howell ended up winning the team title. It's 5th in program history, first since 2020. Tanner Hodgins had a major decision over Holmdel's Alex Reyes in the final. 2 the top 190 pounders in the state, 2 nationally ranked 190 pounders. And Joe Hodgins just looked like he's on a different level. I mean, he had a tech fall over CBA's Rumson's Luke Daugherty in the semifinals, and Daugherty's a ranked wrestler, and then a major decision win over Reyes. I mean, Hodgins he looks like he gets better and better every time he's on the mat.
He was there. And I think Reyes made the mistake of poking the bear. Hodgins said that Reyes has, a really good Russian, and, we kind of came right out and snapped him to the mat. And it was like, it woke Hodgins up, and, then he just laid down a path of destruction for the rest of the 3 periods. He looks bullish. He looks strong. He's slick at times, but more than anything, Bob, I just think he's wrestling with enormous confidence, and he seems to be peaking for, the end of the postseason. And, he's got something to wrestle for, as do the rest of the Rebels, when we hit the sectional tournaments. I mean, the way it looks on paper now, they're bound for a Central Jersey semifinal showdown with Southern. So, I think he's going to be motivated from now through to the end of the season.
Totally agreed. And we'll hear more about from Hodgins about all that later on. 2 wrestlers who were the top seed and, really controlled their bracket the whole way to win their 3rd titles, respectively, were Point Pleasant Borough's Jay Clayton and Rumson-Fair Haven's Sonny Amato. Clayton, a 2-time state medalist. His only losses this year to Reed Clossy of West Essex. And he earned his 100th win in the final with a 10-7 win over CBA's Brendan Boyer. And then Sonny Amato just rolled to the title. He earned his 100th career win earlier in the week. And he just, Sonny looked great. The best probably seen him wrestle all year, and he's been really good all year. So those 2 guys get their 3rd win respectively. And then there was a bunch of surprises and some wrestlers that really stood out. I'll start with Julian Zargo from St. John Vianney. 3rd seed in a really good 120-pound bracket. Semifinals, he's up 16-2 and then pins Middletown South Peter Trezza. Trezza was a state qualifier last year, reached the 3rd round of wrestlebacks, just like Zargo did. And then in the final, he gets a takedown with a minute left in the 3rd period, and he beats Howell's Luke Johnston 4-2. Johnston, a returning state medalist who was ranked. So Zargo, a kid who, these last couple of years, easy to get lost in that St. John Vianney lineup with all the talent and the state medalists they had. And you see him coming into his own this year. And talking to head coach Chris Noddy after the fact, he commended the kid's work ethic, his drive, and you're starting to see, that stuff pay off for Zargo. And Joe, he looked good out there, and, beating a state ranked kid like like Johnston, that definitely is going to open some eyes around the shore and around the state.
He hasn't, it seems like we haven't heard from him much until now, but he was certainly on top of his game at the shore conference this week, Bob. And really, so was his teammate, Matt Gould, who's at 26. So, Gould has won his second shore conference tournament championship, his fourth shore conference medal overall. He looked good at 26 again. This is a kid who's a two-time placer down in Atlantic City. And then we also hear that Bubba Gavrish may be back this week. Look, St. John Vianney's not going to make a run like it did last year or the last couple of years in non-public B. But I'm going to tell you what, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the districts, because all these kids seem to be rounded into form. They finally seem to be healthy. And I don't think we're going to see the team that was beaten by 60, by CBA last week or the week before that. But I think we're going to see a team that has some talented individuals that's going to make a little bit of noise in both the district and the regional tournaments, Bob.
106 has been a volatile weight all season. And for once, we actually had the rankings hold in the 106-pound short conference final. Middletown North's Thomas Blewett edges CBA's Santino Edgar 2-1. It was the only takedown of the match came in the third period. That was for Blewett, and that won him the title. And then right before that heavyweight, you had Madawan's Muhammad Targali, who has, become one of the better heavyweights in the state. He's been ranked, for a few weeks now. And he became Madawan's first shore conference tournament champion. So both those guys with big results. And then one of the bigger storylines coming out of the tournament was the Jackson senior duo of Armani McCann and Tucker Pazinko. Pazinko reached the blood round last year, I believe at 126 pounds. McCann was a state medalist. All year, McCann has been at 138. Pazinko's been at 144. They flip-flopped for this tournament, which Joe wrote about, and it really yielded some great results. Both of them won conference titles and looked really good. Pazinko ended up earning the Most Outstanding Wrestler award, and he won 7-6 over Rumson-Fair Haven's Joaquin Duque, who was a state medalist last year. And, that's an interesting switch, Joe, and it seems like it's for the best for both. I mean, Pazinko really wanted to go down to 38, and McCann wanted to be at 44, and it looks like that's a match made in heaven.
Oh, it does. And credit head coach Gianna Gione for recognizing that. And I talked to Tucker Pazinko after, and he said, it's just a matter of he feels small at 44 and he doesn't feel small at 38. And he really wrestled well. He was, aggressive, and he kept after, DeQ. And I thought it was a really good performance. His dad's a former state champ at East Brunswick. So, and Pazinko's been knocking on the door. It's his third medal. He was second in 25. He was fourth in 24. But he finally, works his way to the top of the podium. And as Pazinko said about Armani McCann, Armani likes to wrestle fat and happy. And
that was a great quote.
It was a great line. And McCann is a big kid, at 44. He can handle the weight. He can handle some big kids. And he just manhandled a fairly good wrestler, in my opinion, in Alexander Lissa-Matawan. I think that's not only going to help the two wrestlers themselves come the individual portion, but look, Jackson feels like it's a contender in Central 5, and this may allow them to give Howell a little bit of run. I don't know how much it'll affect Southern, but last week when Southern wrestled Jackson, Pazinko went 44, and Atelovich Lanty just manhandled him. Maybe things will be a little different, in those two bouts with McCann going 44, Bob.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, maybe that was the impetus to finally go and make that change. But for whatever reason it's worked out great for them. And, we'll see what those guys do going forward. South Jersey had some big time action this week, and Bill was monitoring. We had the Burlington County Open, which Bill was at, and we also had the Pine Barrens Duels, which had 5 teams ranked in the NJ.com top 20, with St. Peter's Prep coming out on top. So, Bill, we'll let you take it from here. I mean, we'll start with the Pine Barrens Duels. I mean, that's a pretty loaded dual meet tournament, and we had some really good wrestling, and a lot of results that we've been looking to see as far as how the top 20 shakes out.
Yeah, I think one of the better dual meet tournaments we've had this year. Out of the 8 teams, 5 of them were in the top 20. St. Peter's, Delsea, Lower Cape May, Red Bank Catholic, Washington Township, and they actually finished in that order. And then the other teams weren't bad. I mean, you got High Point, who was a Group 2 contender. Shawnee's a solid Group 4 team, and then Petty, private school. St. Peter's has won this thing pretty much every year. I think they had to work a little harder this year than they have in the past. I think some past years they didn't even, bring a full lineup, and while they were missing a couple kids, that they had predominantly the regular lineup, and Delsea and Lower Cape May gave them a little bit of trouble. Amari Van from Delsea beat Gino Shanina in 138 match. Lower Cape May's David Douglas beat a state ranked kid in Carmen Morano. Both those matches were about 17 points. And then, you kind of look at some of the other matches. LCM beat our Red Bank Catholic in the third place match. RBC Washington Township in the first round was a very, very good match. So that was an entertaining dual meet tournament with a lot of good teams. From there, you said the Burlington County Open, which I was at. There were some very good kids there. Jackson Weller was probably the best. He did win most outstanding wrestler. He's a third place finisher at the state last year. Got pinned in the Delbarton match at the Jack Welch Duels, but bounced back very nicely. Had a win over an undefeated Joey Hartz from Bordentown by technical fall. Dominic Marino from St. Vincent stayed undefeated, as did Jackson Weller and Pat Degnan. Both of those are upper weights. Wheeler from Lenape and Degnan from Seneca, who are also both undefeated. So I think you'll see a lot of those guys make some noise in Atlantic City. Raymond Miller was another one, had a good tournament at 165 and entered our state rankings this week. So and Lenape ended up winning the team title. Maybe a little bit of an upset there. Owen Boyle, Reed Angermeyer also won titles for them, and they kind of sneaked by Seneca with a little bit of a better performance in the finals. And then lastly, we had a really good dual meet on Wednesday between Washington Township and Kingsway. Continued that rivalry. Some big pins in that match from Michael Horn and Landon Stone for Washington Township, who looked like they were dead in the water after they lost the first 2 matches. Joel Alfonso had a win in the last seconds against Frankie Albright. Evan Vallejo knocked off Dylan Hetzel at 113, and Kingsway looked like they were had the match in hand. Kingsway also made a little bit of a lineup, well, not a little bit, but a big lineup mistake, and they sent Jamar Greaves out at 175. Coach Mike Brickian, who's really one of the best coaches in the state, he took responsibility for it. He said he had the kid on a descent plan, had him ready to come down for this match. He weighed in at 176.6, I believe it was. He was a couple tenths of a pound under 177, but his descent plan only had him at 177.1. Washington Township picked up on it, and that ended up being a big forfeit in that match. That could end up affecting the South Jersey Group 5 seedings. Right now, Kingsway's 3, Washington Township's 4, but they would flip if they stayed in that spot, which would pretty much mean Township going to Howell and Kingsway going to Southern. I don't know how big of a difference that would be, but it definitely could be make an impact. So yeah, some good matches, good individual tournament, good dual meet tournament, and good dual meet last week. So a lot of the good things to look back on.
It's amazing how often proper paperwork comes into play to decide a wrestling match. Up in Essex County, Seton Hall Prep in control of that tournament basically the entire way, and some other good storylines out of the Essex County tournament, Jake.
Yeah, so the Pirates won their, I think it's 5th tournament in 7 tries. I forget the exact number, but yeah, so they scored 289 team points. The stories for them were kind of twofold. On one hand, they had Rocco Salerno at 215 pounds. He became the 11th 4-time champ in Essex County history, joining his coach Lou Mascola as one of them. So that gives Seton Hall Prep 3, which is the most of any program. But sort of controversially, Salerno was not named the tournament's most outstanding wrestler. That honor went to West Essex 126-pounder Christian Bastante, who had maybe the best wrestled final of any of them. He had a 3-2 ultimate tiebreaker win over Joe Viola, state qualifier for Seton Hall Prep. And listen, when the OW votes were announced, Seton Hall Prep parents and fans and, even Salerno himself were rightfully, I think, surprised, definitely a little bit pissed off, just kind of questioning things and how could this happen. And, I asked, Coach Lou Mascola, I asked Salerno, I asked Tyler Yildiz, who was the 144-pound champ for the Pirates, if they think they come into that tournament with the target on their back, kind of as the only, kind of true non-public school in that field, St. Benedict's kind of notwithstanding. And, they said, yeah. And Salerno's like, he's like, he didn't think anything of it before kind of that moment. And he didn't realize maybe to what extent it got borne out. And listen, he was frustrated, but, he calmed down after and was, very gracious and, understanding. And listen, he was honest. He said, as great as it is to win, 4 Essex County titles, he has bigger goals. And, he's committed to NYU to wrestle. He's a 2-time state medalist, but he's been hurt in each of the last 2 state tournaments. So he doesn't feel like he's even really maximized and reached his full potential. So, I think that was interesting. The biggest upset was probably at heavyweight. Livingston's 10th-seeded Muhammad Arganhali beat Jake Sareva, the 285-pounder from Cedar Grove, who I know was a Mustang Classic champ at Brick Memorial. So that was a really nice win. Nutley had a champ in Aiden Rotbaum at 165. Caldwell had its share of champs. West Essex had 4 champs, and, they finished in second place. Notably, Reed Clausey wrestled at 175 at the tournament, but that was more out of deference to a senior at 165 to kind of give him his last chance. Joe Formosa at 113, freshman for the Knights. Coach Mike Markey was really high on him, expects big things from him in the future. So, yeah, I think in Essex, obviously Seton Hall Prep, like you said, has reigned supreme for a long time, continued to do so. And, the other thing with Salerno is it's not even just that he won 4 county titles, but it's how dominant he's been in the process. In all but one of his bouts that he's ever wrestled in the Essex County Tournament, he's won by pin. The only match in the Essex County Tournament over all 4 years that he didn't win by fall was his final freshman year. He beat West Essex Chris Nigro. I think it was a 3-1 decision. So that just goes to show, he's not just winning these titles and, putting up big points. He's doing it handily. He's dominating. I mean, I think he spent less than 2 minutes on the mat over the course of 2 days, or right around 2 minutes. So, yeah, I think that was interesting. And, for Seton Hall Prep, they haven't won the SEC American division in the last few years. So I think they were happy to get that one back. But, yeah, I think Essex County, Caldwell is always good. West Essex always has some kids. So I think these are teams that you're going to be hearing more and more about, not just in the county tournament, but as, we get closer to the team state tournament and, the individual postseason.
And lastly, as far as looking back, and we'll also segue into our next segment on some of the surprises we saw last week, but at the Greater Middlesex Conference Tournament, 2 teams that were previously ranked in our top 20 battled it out for the top spot, and it was Old Bridge coming away with the victory. A big win for the Knights, and also a big individual win that helped Old Bridge come out on top for the title.
Yeah, so it was their first title in school history. Old Bridge has only been open since 1995. Before that, it was Cedar Ridge and Madison Central. Mm-hmm. But in its current formation, Old Bridge has never won a GMC title. And they kind of ran away with it. They put up 241 points to win the team race. St. Joe's Metuchen, even with 5 champs, put up 204.5. So that just goes to show what we've talked about all season. These tournaments are so often won in the wrestleback rounds, in the consolation rounds, and there were a bunch of surprising results. I think obviously to the point that you brought up, Bob, Old Bridge 190-pounder Tamila Adumbo, who I know Joe wrote about, lost his wrestle off, didn't quit, didn't give up, found a spot in the lineup, and he won a title as a 13 seed with a 9-7 decision. And, I know Joe talked, to Coach John Post about it. But that is what you need in some of these tournaments, is guys to kind of come out of nowhere and pull upsets and, get points where you don't expect them to. And I think it is especially amplified by the fact that, you look at the 113-pound final, Gavin Young, who was ranked in the state for us for basically the entire first month of the season at 113, got pinned in 29 seconds by Woodbridge's Noah Perez, who became the Barrens' first county champ since 2018. And Young got pinned in 29 seconds after pinning Perez in a duel in 329. So, to reverse fortune like that and to have, a bout like that knock Woodbridge's way and for them to still win, I think was a super impressive showing. They were within 3 points of St. Joe's Metuchen when they wrestled in the duel. So, I think to see them expand that margin to such an impressive level here says a lot about this team and its potential.
And on the same topic of surprises, up at the Passaic County Tournament, we had one of those, Ryan, a result that, I know caught your eye.
Yeah, Passaic Tech, I mean, look, they're 10-8 in duels this year, right? But they've always tested themselves. They've wrestled St. Joe's, they've wrestled Immaculata, Pascack Valley, Kingsway, Lacey, Old Bridge. I believe they've also wrestled Cedar Grove. Like they've wrestled a lot of tough teams, so they've taken their lumps. And this schedule kind of comes with losses, but gets them ready for the home stretch of the year, and that includes the Passaic County Tournament. And they're healthy now. They dealt with some injuries earlier in the year. I think they're going to be ready for the sectional tournament. I know that they take a lot of pride in that. Usually it's against Clifton. Clifton's a little down this year. But they take pride in getting to Southern, getting on the mat with Southern in February. But they got guys like Muhammad Abahadba, Tyler Whartonaby. I think they can break through this year on the individual level. But this is a county this year that had Wayne Valley returned a decent amount from last year's championship team. They lost a lot, but enough back and enough newcomers where, they're a very impressive team this year. Passaic Valley returned a couple champs. DePaul has hammers that I mentioned last week. And even Pompton Lakes has a couple guys who are really good. One being Chad McConnell, who we have ranked now at 165 pounds. But Passaic Tech kind of came out of nowhere. They just showed you how deep they were, how balanced they were. And don't mind that 10-8 record. I mean, that's still a really good team. And then, as for the rest of the tournament, Jack Lorper finally broke through this year. 2 losses in the finals, comes through this year against a state medalist in Joey Rizzuto from DePaul. He was at Bosco as a freshman, was in the lineup and just really has longed for this moment, this big moment where, he's got a reason to believe that he can do something later on in the year. I believe he's a wrestleback third. He thinks he can make the podium this year. I believe in him as well. So Jack Lorper out of Hawthorne at 132 is all of a sudden, a name to watch.
And over at the Shore Conference Tournament, we didn't have any really low seeds make any kind of deep runs. I think the lowest seed to make a final was Howell freshman Brady Little as the 6th seed, but that was, more, he's a freshman, doesn't have a lot of criteria, and he was seeded low. But, certainly the wrestler that stood out for me was Keansburg senior Shawn Retta. And if you read my story on him or followed the coverage, he's the Tank, his nickname. Whenever he gets on the mat, it's tank time. You can hear his dad, Daniel, starting the chants. And, Retta had a historic weekend for the Titans. In the opening round, he won his 100th career match, became just the second 100-win wrestler in Keansburg history, tied with Tyree Sutton, who was a 2015 state champion, the only state champion in Keansburg history. And then, later on in the tournament, Retta picked up 2 more wins to become the program's all-time wins leader. He's the first wrestler in program history to reach a Shore Conference tournament final. And listen, Keansburg doesn't have a rich wrestling tradition. They've only had, I believe, 6 different wrestlers win district titles. Sutton was a 2-time champ. Middletown South head coach Matt Rosner was also a 2-time champ. So, Sutton's the only region champ ever, and then he was a state champ. So, again, there's not a lot on that wrestling wall, and Retta has a chance to, put himself, up there with those wrestlers if he can win a district title and find his way to Atlantic City. And he wrestled a really good tournament. Semifinals, he eked out a 2-1 victory in ultimate tiebreaker over Toms River South's Brett Rankin. Rankin had defeated Retta earlier in the season in sudden victory. And then in the final, he did lose 7-2 to Howell's Tim O'Rourke, but he put up a battle. I mean, Retta had a chance to get a takedown to potentially take the lead late in the third period, but instead O'Rourke got that takedown to seal the victory. So Shawn Retta, a great weekend, and I'm really interested to see what he can do when the individual postseason comes around, because it would be a great story if he can win a district title and then move on to Atlantic City. Moving on to the individual rankings, where our latest ones are up on NJ.com. Some weight classes, nice and easy for us. Not a lot of movement. Others, not so much. And some weight classes are really starting to become intriguing. One of those is at 120 pounds for various reasons. You have Cam Santz, state champ, ranked there at number 1, doing his thing. We had a lot of movement otherwise from 2 through 8, a new wrestler in. And there's also the question of when's JoJo Burke going to come back, the St. Joe's regional standout, who is a returning state champ. And then also the effect of 126 with CBA standout Paul Kenny being there. So a lot going on. We had Cade Collins with Southern Regional move up to number 2. We had Julian Zargo of St. John Vianney, who we spoke about winning the short conference title, coming in at number 8. Ryan, this is an interesting one because right now it's a really good weight, and you're going to add JoJo Burke in here pretty soon. So there's going to be a really good wrestler who's not in it. So I think the question we're all asking is this the way 120 is going to look, or is it going to give any more stacked with some wrestlers maybe saying, hey, 26 not the place for me, let me go down? Yeah,
you think about it, like this is a weight that could very well have a Santz Burke final, and you see that it's this stack loaded with state medalists, state blood rounders. And I thought JoJo was going to come back on Saturday. He got his cast off around a week ago, just before the Paramus Catholic match. Wasn't going to wrestle that match, but there was a chance he could wrestle on Saturday. It turns out, Joe's didn't need him or Ben Marquez, and they win the match against Bergen. But I think he's very close. My guess is they're going to, ease him in. I don't know if he's going to wrestle much before the team tournament, but might wrestle a couple duels. That's usually how Coach Farinero does things. But I think he's going to go either to number 1 or number 2 in our 120-pound ranks when he's healthy. But you have Robbie Rodriguez in this class, up north from St. Peter's. We've mentioned him on the pod before. He's really good. He's got a couple great wins on his resume. He did lose to Dante DePaul up a weight at the Pine Barren duels last week, but like I said, we've seen enough, from him to be impressed. Cole Rebels, a freshman from Mount Olive, we mentioned him before. He won the Morris County Tournament title at 120. Is he going to go here? Is he going to go at 113? We're going to find out. Can some of these other kids suck down to 113? Do they want to go to 26 and deal with, the route to Paul Kenny? Very likely the scenario there in the final. But like you said, Bob, like a dozen to 15 names here who are just studs, absolute hammers at 120. It's going to be interesting to see how this kind of shakes out. It was one of the rankings we were looking at in our indie ranks call on Monday, and we were like, geez, like this weight's just really, really good. I know, Jake, you have Carmine Sipper at this weight that you keep a close eye on every year. Michael Daly as well from Cranford. What do you make of this weight?
Yeah, I think, again, those are two kids. Sipper, took 3rd in the state last year. He's going to Navy to wrestle for Kerry Colott. Mike Daly going at Pitt. He took 8th in the state last year. And these are kids who, again, in any other weight, in any other year, would probably be state title contenders. And, I think it's, they've sort of been victims of circumstance and have, come about at it's sort of an unfortunate time insofar as, 126 last year had obviously Anthony Knox, and then everybody fleed to 120. We could be seeing something similar here. And, at 120, obviously Cam Santz is the only 2-time defending state champ among juniors. And yeah, I think if you're a lightweight, if you're one of these studs at 20, 26, 13, you've got to probably be thinking to yourself, like, God, what more have I got to do other than weigh 150 pounds or weigh 175 pounds to really kind of crack through and, make some noise. And that's not to say it can't happen. That's not to say that we don't see upsets in the state tournament. That's not to say a guy can't get caught or doesn't get, thrown to their back suddenly and a victim of, a 5, 6, 7 point move. But I think this is one of the weights where, as much as, we think the top is a foregone conclusion, I think these two weights in particular are two where the race for, the 2 through 8 spots and who's getting on the podium are going to be super, super tough. And, there are kids who might, burst on the scene, like Luke Johnston. We dropped from the rankings this week from Howell. He's a state medalist. There's no reason to think he can't get back to that level. Same thing with Shawn Elliott, the Howell freshman, Matt Gould, who's a 2-time state medalist for St. John Vianney. So I think, top to bottom, the top might be among the best of any in the state, but 2 through 8, I think, is also the best through any in the state. It's just the gap between 1 and 2, I think, is maybe a little bit more noticeable, at these two weights than it is at some of the others.
Yeah, and then at 126, as we mentioned, CBA's Paul Kenny, the returning state champion, viewed as the big-time front runner there, but that's still a strong weight. Delbarton, sophomore Tommy Marchetti, and as Ryan mentioned earlier, Mikey Bautista, St. Joe's, he dropped down to 126. Looks like he's going to settle in there, and he's all the way up to number 3 there. So still a strong weight. Our weekly 106 update, I think this is just a recurring segment now because this weight is insane. The top 8, I think you could look at anyone in there and realistically picture them on top of the medal stand and Boardwalk Hall. And there's probably a few guys outside of the top 8, that you could also make that claim about as well. Thomas Blewett of Middletown North. He's the lone undefeated wrestler there, and he held that spot with the win over Santino Edgar in the Shore Conference Final. So Blewett, the lone upperclassman there. I mean, it's a really Delsey's Adam Froelich, also an upperclassman there. He's a senior. So, but mostly freshmen and sophomores, which is not unusual for 106 pounds. Blewett stays at number 1, but then we had some more movement. John Tarantino, the freshman from Red Bank Catholic, he had a victory over Adam Froelich. Froelich had the pin over Santino Edgar last week, so some shuffling there. It's a really good weight class. St. Joe's Montvale freshman Ray Burdett had a big win, so he's a wrestler that caught our eye. So, again, always keep your eye on 106 pounds because I think week in, week out, you don't know what's going to happen there, and the results have made it very challenging to rank, but I think that's going to make it really fun on the mat. That's going to be one of the most exciting weights, not just in Atlantic City, but just to see who can get there. Districts, regions, I think there can be a lot of upsets and unexpected results with the amount of parity there. And parity in a sense where all those guys are really darn good. It's not like, we're not talking average wrestlers. We're talking kids that are, in most years are easy state medalists, and someone's going to get left off the podium just because of how deep it is. And then another weight I know we talked about before is 157. Camden Catholic's Cage Jones right now atop the rankings. Just a really strong weight from top to bottom. A big debut from Bergen Catholic senior Joey Canova. Ryan, I know we had a tough match against St. Joe's. Ryan Mitchell came away. Or was it against Mitchell? Came away with the loss. Am I correct there? But
yeah, 7-1.
Obviously, the Crusaders want to have him back in the lineup, and that's big for them to get him back.
Yep. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, you look at what he did as a freshman, made the podium, but then he got hurt, missed, I believe it was all of his sophomore year, and then comes back last year, was real good, tears his ACL. So he's been waiting all this time. He was still dealing with swelling, I was told, from Coach Santoli up until really last week when he got cleared. So, it's going to be interesting to see how he does. I think it's pretty equal with him and Mitchell. Maybe Canova's a little better when he's at full strength. But listen, I mean, Ryan Mitchell beat him 7-1. So, you got to tip your cap to Ryan Mitchell. Like I said, he was a blood rounder last year. So he's really good. He's obviously going to want to prove himself and make the podium. But Joey Canova, once he starts getting his feet under him, gets a little healthier, watch out for him. I mean, there's a reason he went right into our rankings. So he's really good. Joey Monticello made a run to the Beast of the East final this year. So, he's a guy who's on a mission after not wrestling last year. So there's a lot of really good kids at this weight. Cage Jones, I think, has the criteria, right? He's got the state finals appearance. So I think that's, kind of the name to beat for now. But there's a lot of kids at this weight. Luke Stemkowski, we've mentioned before. He made some noise at the same Cali. So we've mentioned him a lot. Trevor Jones, a kid from Delbarton, very seasoned. He's wrestled a lot of really tough matches over the course of his career. So look, I mean, this is one of those weights where 8 kids will make the podium. 8 really good kids will make the podium.
Another weight that's really strong from top to bottom is 190, and the wrestler atop that list is Howell Jr. Tanner Hodgins, the Oklahoma State commit and the U17 world bronze medalist, was kind enough to take some time out of his day and shoveling some snow from his house in Howell. So we're able to catch up with Tanner earlier. So here's our interview with Howell Jr., Tanner Hodgins. All right, and right now we're excited to bring into the Weighing In podcast outstanding Howell Jr. Tanner Hodgins, a 190-pound standout, fresh off a victory at the Shore Conference Tournament, his second SCT championship at 190 pounds. And Tanner, one of the top wrestlers, not just in New Jersey, but in all the United States at 190. So plenty to talk about. It's been a pretty big, 9 months for you, Tanner, going all the way back to last year in the state tournament. So we'll rewind a little quick. You won a state medal as a freshman, and then you came in last season as a sophomore and had an even better tournament. So how much confidence did you have coming out of Atlantic City last season where you feel like, you were building on what you did as a freshman and we're making that progress that I know you wanted to make?
Hi. Yeah. So thanks for having me on the podcast. And I mean, going from freshman year where I took 6th to then sophomore year where I took 3rd, obviously, I wanted to place a little bit higher, but I think just keeping that steady improvement was really big.
And taking 3rd is, I always think about taking 3rd as a pretty big deal because you lose at some point, whether it's early or whether it's in the semifinals, and you got to win, a couple matches to get back. I mean, we see that dreaded, semi slide a lot. Guys, lose there, and sometimes they can't regroup. They end up taking 6th and they walk away disappointed. What was that like, just trying to regroup mentally? You get to that point in the tournament where you did, and I know you want to win a championship. What was that like, just, trying to erase that and go back and get that next best thing? And then being able to do that, were you proud of the way you were able to regroup?
Yeah. I mean, the semi slide is definitely notorious in the wrestling world. And I fell to that my freshman year. I went from the semis all the way to taking 6th. Mm-hmm. And I think a big thing my sophomore year was after I lost in the quarters, I knew that next match was probably going to be my most important match of the whole tournament. So I really kind of had to just suck it up and change my mindset a little bit, because I knew that if I got past that next match, that the rest of the tournament would have been a lot better for me.
It's hard. I mean, I'm not speaking from experience, but I imagine it's hard entering high school and being an upper weight, because most of the wrestlers you're going against are juniors, seniors. Some of these, you could be a high school freshman wrestling a grown man, and that's not easy. It's not the same as coming in and, wrestling 106, 113, not to take anything away from those guys, certainly, but what kind of adjustment was that coming in and, you're good. I'm sure you're confident in your technique and all that stuff, but some of these guys are just bigger and stronger being older. So what kind of adjustment was that for you coming into high school?
Yeah, I mean, definitely was an adjustment going from being on the stronger side of kids in middle school to then, wrestling kids with sometimes like a mustache and beard in high school. And, I'm just a freshman. So it's like, it was a little overwhelming, but I think it was also fun at the same time, because I started to realize that, like, once you got past the strength part of it, that those kids didn't really have anything on me. And as long as, I wrestled to not put myself in positions where strength was going to be a huge factor, that I would be okay.
So then you come off the 3rd place finish in Atlantic City, and then, right about a month later, a little over a month, you go to the U.S. under 17 World Team Trials, the U.S. Open, and you win it at 92 kilograms. That was awesome. I remember seeing that news come out. What were your expectations going into that tournament? Did you feel like you had a good chance to win it, or were you just going there, just seeing how good you could do? What was your mentality, heading into the U.S. Open?
Yeah, so sophomore year, all of last year, I was always wrestling kids that were older than me and maybe a little bit bigger, like Harvey and Laval. They're both, great wrestlers, and they were grown men at that point compared to me. So, I mean, going into U17s, I had a lot of confidence because I knew that I was wrestling way older kids all year, so that going into that tournament, where everyone's my age, I was pretty confident myself.
So then from there, you move on to the U17 World Championships, which were those in Greece? Am I correct with that? Mm-hmm. So you go out there, and you end up winning the world bronze, which is an amazing accomplishment. So just first, tell me about that. I mean, when that kind of set in that, you're a world bronze medalist, world medalist, what was that like?
It was definitely a pretty cool feeling. I mean, I was nervous for sure for Worlds, but I was also super excited. And dropping that first match to Iran kind of sucked. And then I kind of had to become his biggest fan because the way freestyle brackets work overseas, if the person that you lose to makes the finals, then you get pulled into repetage. So I kind of had to root for him, but I mean, just switching my mental mindset because I was pretty nervous for that first match, and then being able to wrestle all the way back, I was a little almost shocked at myself after the bronze medal match, and I think it took a few days even to set in, but it was definitely a really good feeling.
Was that your first time wrestling overseas?
No, I've been to the Talent Open in Estonia twice before. So I was familiar with wrestling overseas, but it was definitely its own experience for sure.
Yeah, tell me about that experience. I mean, just going out there, the best of the best, U17, and then obviously winning the medal, but just that experience as a whole, what did that mean for you? And how do you think it's helped you, so far in your junior season?
I think it's given me a lot of confidence. I mean, knowing that I can go anywhere and compete with the best kids in the world kind of puts things in perspective for me, because if I can go to Greece and wrestle kids from Georgia and Iran and Kazakhstan and whatever those countries are, then I can definitely wrestle with someone from the town over.
Yeah, for sure. So then, U17 World Championships finish up. That was in August, correct?
Yep.
And then you have, I'm sure you rest your other off-season stuff. And then a couple months later, you commit to Oklahoma State. So obviously that's a huge moment in your life, and a belated congratulations, on that. What was the recruiting process like? I mean, were there other schools you were seriously considering, or was Oklahoma State the front runner the whole time? I mean, how did that come to play where Oklahoma State ended up being the school that you settled on?
Yeah, I mean, all the schools that recruited me were amazing, and I really didn't have a bad experience with anybody. I think when it came down to it, I was looking at Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, NC State, and Michigan. And I think that, with everything that was going on with Oklahoma State at the time, with David Taylor becoming the new coach, and I've looked up to him for a while now, ever since I was little. I think that played a little bit of a factor, but also just like the rich history there and how everybody there gets behind the wrestling team, I thought was really cool. But the whole process was fun. I mean, getting to see all the different schools and the different aspects of, what college could be like, just in general, aside from wrestling, like the different campuses and all that stuff. I had a lot of fun on the recruiting process.
And David Taylor, obviously one of the great American wrestlers, national champion, world medalist, Olympics, all that stuff. And you mentioned you've been a big fan of him and looked up to him for a long time. So I imagine that was a big part of that process. It seems like that's been the case for Oklahoma State, since he took over. It seems like a very obvious thing, you want to wrestle for someone like that. What's it been like just being recruited by him? And then I'm sure you're in contact with him, when you can, and just having someone like that lead who's been there, who's accomplished the things that I know you want to accomplish. How helpful is that, knowing that you're going to have someone like that in your corner the rest of the way throughout college?
I mean, it's definitely a good feeling, knowing that someone like that has my back. I think the first time he ever called and texted me, I was pretty excited, and it was almost like calling a celebrity calling you, like in terms of wrestling, because that's kind of who he is. But now, I mean, having talked with him and been out there for the visit, it's just Coach Dave. So, I mean, I think it's really comforting having him to be able to back me and support me. And I think it's going to help me a lot in the future.
When we talked on Saturday at the Shore Conference tournament, you talked about his impact that he's had on you already, just helping you with your mindset and things of that nature. And, we also talked about how important that is, and the mental part being, probably more important than the physical part. Can you just expand on that too? I mean, you talked about how technique, sometimes you get to a point where you can only do so much and the mental edge is what separates people. Have you started to, has that become a big part of your process now where you feel like that is something that can take you to that next level?
Yeah. I mean, there are only so many hours in a day. Like, you can only practice so much. So I think having that mental edge on people is a big thing. And the impact that Coach Taylor has made on me already without even like being here, he doesn't even have to be here to make an impact on me. Just calling and texting with him, being able to talk about my mindset, and just someone like that telling me that like things are going to be okay and that things are going to work out is definitely comforting. Um, I think he's helped me realize a lot that like it's just a sport and I should enjoy it as much as I can, because you should only be wrestling or taking wrestling seriously if you really love it. And I think that he's kind of opened my eyes to that a little bit, and it's made wrestling since then a little bit more freeing.
That was just in my follow-up to that. I've been fortunate enough to cover the sport for a long time, and you guys are hard on yourselves. Your own worst critics. When I hear wrestlers talking about having a better mindset, to me that's just being more positive. To themselves. Is it that simple? Just not getting too down, not getting too hard on yourself. Taking a loss and maybe having a more clinical approach. Hey, how can I improve? What did I do wrong? Instead of just being down in the dumps and upset about it. Is that the difference when you're talking about mindset?
Yeah, I think being able to bounce back from things is a big part of it. And I mean, sometimes there's not always going to be a reason for a loss. Sometimes things just happen, or the other kid was just better than you that day, and there's nothing you can really do about that. So, I mean, obviously, I think everyone is trying to strive to be their best every day, but you might have an off day here or there, or you might have an off practice. And I think not letting that get to your head is very important when people talk about mindset. And I think that, everyone can say they have a great mindset or talk about having a great mindset, but it's really when you have those bad practices or that bad match, like being able to implement what you're talking about or saying is really making the difference.
And as we mentioned, this past Saturday, you won the Shore Conference tournament at 190 pounds. Your second SCT title, you won as well as a freshman. Third time in the finals. You mentioned, last season lost to Harvey Ludington, who's now at Iowa. A three-time state champ. So, you've been, at and near the top of the Shore Conference, all 3 years. You helped your team win a team championship. I know wrestling for Howell means a lot to you, and I see, kind of the initials on your singlet and stuff. So, what does it mean to represent a program that has so much tradition within the Shore Conference, and help them win things and just, attach your name to Howell and vice versa, just in a winning way?
Yeah, there's no place I'd rather be than Howell. And I can say that honestly and, with my whole heart, because I like, I've grown up watching them since I was little and came all through the Jersey Shore League Predator program. And ever since I started wrestling, it was just my dream to put on that Howell singlet and, be in those big moments. So I think the team that we had this year is very talented, and we're still young, and everybody on the team wants to win. So, I mean, when you're surrounded around people like that, it makes it pretty easy. And I think us winning the Shore Conferences as a team was just the start for us.
And you mentioned it's a very good team, a championship contending squad for sure. You just won a Shore Conference title, fifth in the program's history. And you have a lot of really good freshmen that have certainly, bolstered the lineup. Justin Janney down at 106, Shawn Elliott at, Brady Little at 157, your brother Trevor in the middle of that lineup. And I'm sure there's a couple other guys. So how do you think those guys have adapted so far, to the lineup and joining the team that has, some high expectations?
Yeah, I think they all definitely stepped up to the plate and are able to hold their own. I mean, every single one of the freshmen that we have this year that's in the starting lineup is tough. Like, you're not getting an easy match anywhere in our lineup. So I think that those kids being able to kind of step up and take a hit every once in a while, or step up and get bonus points when we need it, is huge, because a lot of times it takes a year or two for some kids to develop. And I think that this freshman class has already done that.
Yeah. How good do you think this group could be collectively? Because, like I said, it's a strong group. It's a deep group. And, as they get older, it seems like they're going to be the anchors of this program.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's 5 of them, and they've been training together since they were little in middle school and elementary school. So, I mean, they're all very close, and they have no problem pushing each other in the practice room. There have been, some scuffles or some fights, but I mean, they all just want to get better. So I think even my class with, us 3, me, Luke, and Tyler, I think that it's just going to be another version of that, but better.
And then your brother, Trevor, is a freshman 138 pounder. He's having a solid season. What's it been like being on the same team with him now in high school? That's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been cool. It makes me feel a little old, but it's been good. I mean, I know I've wanted to wrestle with him on the same team for a while now, and I think it's pretty cool that we get to do that. I mean, I get more nervous for his matches than I do for my own matches, but I guess it just is something I have to deal with. But it's fun for sure, the bus rides and even just seeing him in school. I'm just trying to take in the experience because I know I only have it for one more year.
I'm sure it's got to be fun for your parents too, just being able to watch the both of you wrestle at the same time, same place.
Yeah. Now I don't have to drive between the middle school matches and the high school matches. They just get to go to one place now.
Oh, believe me, I know what that's all about. I'm driving from high school to middle school to watch my own kids. So
yeah,
it's a lot easier than one spot. And then, like you said, as a team, it's a really good team and a team that can contend for championships. And in Group 5, I think if you took a poll of everyone who follows high school wrestling in New Jersey closely, it's Southern and it's Howell. And that's an old school shore conference rivalry. 2 teams that, have wrestled in huge matches over the years. Southern's won some, Howell's won some, and it just seems like that's going to be the collision course. And you guys are in the same section too. So I know you don't want to get ahead of yourself. I'm sure Coach Gagliano has said as much, but is that in the back of your mind where you guys are anticipating that and kind of looking forward to it, later in the season?
Yeah. We have a countdown in our room, and that's our goal. That's been our goal since the first day of practice. And every team that we wrestle leading up to that is just in the way. So, I mean, that's our main goal, and it has been for a while now. So, I mean, we're really excited for that match.
What would it mean for you to help bring a team championship, a state championship back to Howell?
It would be awesome. I mean, you can't have 1 or 2 kids or 3 kids do all the work in a lineup. So it's a team effort. But, I mean, just trying to push everyone in the room every day and remind them, that that's our goal. I've been trying to do that a lot. And I think it would be definitely special for this team to bring home a state title.
And then you got a big one coming up, Wednesday night at home against Jackson Township, another rivalry within the shore. Jackson's a team that, is one of the better teams in Group 4, a team ranked in the state, just like you guys. So how much looking forward to that? And the atmosphere when you guys wrestle at home, is one of the best in the shore. The lights go down and Eye of the Tiger comes on and the place is packed, and it's got to be a fun place to wrestle.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're excited for that match. We're excited anytime we get to wrestle. So having it at home is definitely cool. We don't have to go anywhere or take the bus. And I know they're a solid team since they've combined schools, but I mean, the plan is going to be the same. It's going to be to go out there and dominate like we always do.
Last question. How bad was the snow out in Howell for you? A lot of shoveling?
It is pretty bad, actually. I'm in my room right now and I can see out the window. There's probably a good 1.5 feet of snow. My dog actually was running around earlier, and she would like run across the snow, and then she would hit like a soft spot and just fall like right through it. And you wouldn't be able to see her anymore because she's pretty small. But
yeah, it's definitely a lot of snow out there.
Yeah.
Well, Tanner, man, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day and joining us, and some great insight into what you've accomplished, your process, and what you hope to accomplish going forward. So
yeah,
again, thank you, and we wish you nothing but the best going forward.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You got it. That's Howell Jr. Tanner Hodgins on the Weighing In podcast. Thanks again, Tanner.
Thank you.
All right, and a great conversation as always with Tanner, and we thank him for joining us, and look forward to see what he can accomplish going forward. An impressive young man. I mean, really good stuff from Tanner. So it's funny. We talked to him a little bit, off the air after we spoke to him, and he said his dad had him go through a little bit of media training, back when he was in middle school. So you can definitely see it pays off. A very well-spoken student athlete. All right, coming up this week, a little bit of a lull, but not really. I mean, there's still some really good matches on the schedule, and a huge one. We'll start with Delbarton, Blair Academy. A massive New Jersey duel. Obviously, Blair not an NJSIAA school, but still, that's a huge one, and that should be a huge atmosphere and a pretty fun one. And I think the question is now for Delbarton. You beat Faith Christian. Can you do it again against another top 5 team in the country and kind of inch closer to what potentially could be Delbarton finishing number 1 in the nation?
Yeah, I mentioned, they have the reason to dream to be the number 1 team in the country. They have the schedule, I believe, at least. But I think what's interesting about this match is that Delby is probably the underdog here. Unlike last year, you could say, where, Blair was pretty young. Delbarton, had kids like Alessio Parrington, right? They had, kids who, very experienced. A lot of the lineup was obviously very well rounded. And this is a Blair team that I think is starting to look like vintage Blair. I'm looking at, I think this match really just, it boils down to 6 weights that I think are toss-ups, and Delbarton might have to win like 5 of them to win this match. So, I mean, I think it starts with 106. You have Finn Anderson against Jack Anello. Two freshmen. I think this is a pretty even matchup. I think this is one that Delby probably has to have. When you look at 190, I think, Salas Sarni, I would peg him as a slight favorite against CJ Betts. CJ Betts obviously has beaten Adam Waters, from Faith Christian earlier in the year. So he's got that win under his belt. So you make him, he could very much win this, but I would peg Sarni as the slight favorite in this one. Then you look at 120, you have Cam Sance going up against Michael Bautista, and Bautista beat him earlier in the year. I believe it was at Ironman, and last year, this match kind of decided the entire match. You had Cam Sance beat Michael Bautista 5-4 in the duel last year. So it's gone the other way. Could Sance tip it back in his favor? We're going to find out. I would say that, like I said, I think I'd give Sarna the edge against Betts. So I think, these next couple, Delby has to win. So I would think that Sance has to win this one. Tommy Marchetti against Finnegan O'Brien. I would think Marchetti has to win that. Ryan DeGeorge against Weston Borgers. These are 2 national kids. Very, very close match. I could see this being. It could go either way. But like I said, DeGeorge kind of has to win it. And then you have Trevor Jones, the seasoned kid who I just mentioned. He's going to probably match up with Joe Schinder. And I think Jones has to win that one. But like I said, Betts could beat Sarni, but with how good Blair is up top at 215 and 285, Delby's got to win all these toss-ups, but it'll be a very interesting matchup. Awesome atmosphere, like you said, Bob. Blair's got that gym is awesome. They fill that up. Thousands can fit in there. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. I'll be there on Thursday. And yeah, I mean, these are the 2 top programs in the state. What more can you ask for?
Another huge matchup on Wednesday night in the Shore Conference. The number 1 and number 2 teams in the Shore. That'll be number 3 Christian Brothers hosting number 7 Southern Regional. This has been a marquee matchup for the last couple years since these teams are aligned in the same division. CBA has the edge certainly going in, but there could be some awesome individual matchups here, Joe. I mean, what are we thinking? I mean, you and I have been talking about this. We feel like CBA is the favorite, but Southern has a lot of depth. There's some lineup maneuverability. Things will have to go their way. But I'm looking forward to see how this plays out. Again, the individual matchups are really juicy, and that's what's going to decide this duel.
Well, Southern usually wipes people out with its first 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think CBA is going to be able to neutralize that a little. I mean, just some of the matchups. 106. Santino Edgar is 19-7 against Jonas Lusker, who's 14-4. That's an interesting match. At 113, CBA throws out Shiloh Joyce, 19-6. And then Southern counters with its freshman, who's really a physical and nasty wrestler in a good way, is Nick Banos. then I think where we get down to, Bob, is who wins the toss and what they do with it. I don't think Southern wants to go head up with CBA, say from 26 through 57, 65. So, I mean, in my mind, the Southern attempt to move one, Anthony Mason 10-1. I would certainly want to try and get him away from Paul Kenny, and I would imagine Dan Roy would too. And then bump get a Tilla Vigilante away from Bobby Duffy. So do we see Vigilante go from 44 to 50? And then another one for Southern is, where do they put Levi Foote? I don't know that they would want Foote against
Tyler
CBA.
Palumbo.
Tyler Palumbo, who's 23-6. So, we've heard stuff that for the postseason, Foote goes 89. Does he go down to 89, to try and counter there? And could it come down to a heavyweight bout where neither team is exceptionally strong, but it could be a pivotal bout? And one of the other things I think that's going to be important here is CBA entered Brock Oserowitz in the Shore Conference tournament, and he looked great. Oserowitz missed December. He had some foot surgery. Right out of the box, they pushed him up to 190, and he got pinned late by Luke Doherty or Rumson. But, man, he looked good the other day, won his second Shore Conference tournament. There are going to be some phenomenal matchups here. I think, Bob, this is, and I don't know how you see it, but I think this is a 12, 14, point bout. I mean, what do you see and where do you think the key bouts are?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. I mean, it's going to come down to, as it has a lot of times in Southern's history in some of these big matches, who wins the flip? Because if Southern wins the flip, it can dictate some of those matchups, or at least try to, with its depth. I think there's a lot of intrigue in the middle of that lineup, like you mentioned. Attila Vigilante, can they get him away from Bobby Duffy? But again, no easy matchup with Will Secudis at 150 if that's who CBA throws out. So there's going to be a lot of toss-up bouts in the middle of that lineup. Again, Southern, on paper, Southern's got to win the flip, be able to dictate some of those matchups, and then win some toss-ups. The Rams are more than capable of doing that, and I think it's going to be a really good duel on Wednesday night. Then down in South. Yes, go ahead, Joe.
Bob, one quick thing. Let's remember, you look at the Southern lineup, freshmen, sophomores. I mean, another key bout to me there is where sophomore Vincent Esposito goes. The Southern kid he's 15-2, and he could be up against, maybe Brendan Boyer, who's 16-8, or CBA has a freshman named Colin Quinn who beat Boyer in a tournament in the last couple of weeks. So, like I said, a lot of intrigue, and the most important thing is going to be whether that disc comes up red or green before the bout match starts.
Very true. And multiple good matchups in South Jersey. We got some quads and tri meets down in Bill's territory, and a really important Cape Atlantic meet coming up next Tuesday, Bill. So a lot happening down in the southern part of the state.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people aren't real fans of quads or tries, and I'm usually not either. I'd rather a good dual meet tournament or even an individual tournament, where you're kind of wrestling for something at the end instead of just a long day of trading partners. But there's a couple really good ones here where basically all the teams are solid, if not a notch above that. Start out there's a quad at Kingsway that also includes Delran and Audubon and Seneca. I think Kingsway and Seneca are probably the two best teams there, and that should be a really, really good matchup between two of the better teams in South Jersey. But Audubon's one of the better teams in South Jersey Group 1, and Delran's having a strong year as well. They're a Group 2 contender. Kingsway and Delran actually wrestled in the third place match at the Jack Welch Duels, and Kingsway won by a point. Landon Pallies, of one of their good freshmen, had a win at in the final match after Delran's Chase the Book, who has had a great couple weeks, including a title at the Rowan County Open, pinned Evan Vallejo to put Delran, back in the match. Kingsway was missing some guys there, so if they're at full strength, which I think they should be, maybe that's not as close this time. But I think there's four good ones there, and then kind of a little bit of a weird one at St. Augustine, where you have North Hunterdon and Paramus Catholic coming all the way down to face St. Augustine and Ocean City. Ocean City looks like the team that's maybe a little over their head there, but they're still a good team that's 10-2. And St. Augustine is not ranked, but was at the beginning of the year. And earlier in the season, they weren't really healthy. They are now, so I'll be really interested to see how they match up against some of those powers from the north, like PC and North Hunterdon. And then finally, there's a try at Delsea, which includes Lower Cape May and Caldwell. Caldwell and Lower Cape May are both Group 2 contenders. Last year, Lower Cape May and Delsea wrestled in a weird match that Delsea won 71-6. There were 7 forfeits. I imagine, we'll see both teams, kind of at full strength here. And, we talked about, who's the, maybe the best public school in the state. It's probably Southern or Delsea, but Lower Cape May has a chance to make its case here. What should be a, really couple good, interesting matches. And then, next Tuesday, we will have Lower Cape May and St. Augustine wrestle at Lower Cape May. St. Augustine has dominated the Cape Atlantic League, even though teams have kind of stepped up over the years, had some good teams, be it LCM, be it Middle, be it Ocean City. They've kind of defended their turf and kind of really looking forward to this one. The last time St. Augustine lost in the Cape was in 2017 to Egg Harbor. I actually covered that match, and it was so long ago that earlier in the day I went to Bo Melton's college signing for Rutgers. Obviously, he went and had a full career at Rutgers, is now playing for the Green Bay Packers. So it's been quite a while since anybody from the Cape has challenged St. Augustine. This is probably the best chance for somebody to beat St. Augustine since that 2017 Egg Harbor match. They think they got a good chance to do it, but we'll see. Like I said, St. Augustine has always seemed to come up with the goods when they need to. So a very interesting weekend and week for those two teams, as well as some other teams around the region.
And a loaded Wednesday, a match I wanted to mention in the Shore Conference, Colts Neck, Middletown South. That's for a division championship, most likely within the Shore. And two teams that are having really good kind of under the radar years. Both teams at or near the top of their respective PowerPoint standings in their section, and teams that hope to make some postseason noise. So that's a quality and important duel for those two teams. And then lastly, a match we'll be broadcasting Wednesday night from Farmingdale. The aforementioned Howell Rebels, ranked number 10 in the NJ.com top 20, hosting Jackson Township, the number 14 Jaguars coming to town. Not quite the rivalry of Jackson Southern as we had, last week, but Howell Jackson still a really good match. Two old rivals in the old District 21, and that should be a good one. I'll be on the call for that along with our cameraman and producer Josh Noble. So looking forward to that match Wednesday night. So head over to NJ.com for the full live stream if you cannot make it in person. That's going to do it for us here on episode 7. A lot of great stuff this past week, as we mentioned. Again, thank you to Howell Jr. Tanner Hodgins for joining us, and we'll sign off here. For our writers, Joe Zedalis, Bill Evans, Ryan Patti, and Jake Aferiat, and as always, Luis Torres, keeping everything up and running in the studio. I'm Bob Batters saying thanks again for joining us on the Weighing In podcast, and we'll see you next week on NJ.com.